Want to give a little disclosure there that the information here is not legal advice. I'm just giving you information. And then, if you have any questions, you're welcome to give us a call. My colleague, Ed Reisinger, is going to be on in a second. He's running a few seconds late getting on. He's, obviously an attorney, but he's not giving legal advice either to, unless you need to call him and ask him those questions. And we'll just kind of go from there. The first things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm a little further down, he was going to be the first talker, so I'm going to come down here and find where I'm going to talk to you from. So estates and real estate. So that's where my part, and we'll go back up to his part when he pops on in a second. So what is Real Estate Settlement Procedure Act of 1974? I'm sure you all know what this is, but it's, federally regulated mortgage loans, and it protects the consumers who buy, sell, and sell real estate. So one of the things that, I wanted to kind of talk to you about is RESPA and what it covers and your relationship with different folks, because I want y'all to remember that, right? Okay, let me go find that slide. Hold on. Thank you. It is number 34. Y'all don't get a headache. There. All right, there we go. So RESPA covers real estate brokers and agents, mortgage bankers, mortgage brokers, credit unions, realtors, closing attorneys, home warranty companies, hazard insurance agents, appraisers, flood and tax service providers, and home and pest inspectors. So none of us are allowed to give things to people for business, right? So that's kind of what all of it applies to. It applies to so many of us, and RESPA didn't have a whole lot of teeth, right? So along comes CFPB. Section 8 is a prohibition against kickbacks and unearned fees. But along comes, can y'all see that still? Okay. So against that prohibition of kickbacks and unearned fees, you guys can't, pay somebody for business, right? And I can't pay you for business. It prohibits us from accepting anything, beyond small things. No person shall give and no person shall accept any fee, kickback, or thing of value pursuant to any understanding or agreement, oral or otherwise, that that incents somebody to bring you business. So you can't just pay somebody to bring business into you. Now, that's not really talking about the customer and your interest rate and what you do that way. But I can't give you a free lunch or, a big dinner or whatever that might be, right? So on RESPA. Yeah, okay. So when you're talking about that, do you have, like, your loan officers can't go out to real estate agents and say, hey, if you bring me business, I'll give you X. You have to be very careful about that. And that's where I kind of want you guys to, can a title company or, a real estate agent, give a real estate agent notepads. I'm using a title company because I'm a title company. I can give a notepad, but can I give them, a $50 gift card? What about if the lender's name is on it? I can't do that. We have to be very, very careful how we, give things. I can give notepads with the title company's name on it, and it would be allowable as a normal promotional item. But, both names, if I had to have, like, one of the credit union's names on my notepad, then you would have to pay for 50% of that, that notepad as well. So we have to be really careful how we're going to give out those pieces of information and try to make, any kind of co-branding that you might do with your real estate agents that you're using. If you've got a real estate agent that comes to you and says, hey, I want to put a flyer out for my house that I'm trying to sell. I want you to help me with that. And then they come in and you give them a flyer and put their name all over it and put your name in a little bitty corner down at the bottom of the page. You can't do that. You would have to pay for 50% of that flyer. So you need to make sure that if you're going to pay for it, you're going to give them a flyer that they to put out at their house or whatever, that it actually has your the name on it and all of the things that they are wanting to do with that. It has to have your name and their name equally, and you both have to pay half and half. Or if you're going to put it on a quarter of the page, you pay for a quarter of the page. If you're putting something in the local real estate magazine and you're co-doing it with with a real estate agency or a broker, you need to pay for your half of it. If you're going to put half of your, take half the space. So just making certain that you're not putting funds into something that's going to come back and bite you on Section 8. Things of value are tricky, obviously. Any benefits or discounts may be a thing of value, whether or not it includes the transfer of money. So anything you give, receive, or exchange with anybody for a referral, no matter how small that is or how large it is. You can't just give gifts. They do not have an exception for small kickbacks. Now, when you're given, pens that are, have your name on them, that's different. Notepads, that kind of thing. But if you're giving out $50 gift cards, if you bring me business, that is a definite no-no. So that even minimal things they say are things of value. I think notepads and pens don't count. But if you're, talking about anything bigger than, a $5 item, you need to really think about if you're giving that out or not. The penalties for, getting RESPA upset with you. RESPA didn't really have a whole lot of penalties until CFPB kind of attached TILA. And when they attached the Truth in Lending Act to it and they made all their new penalties up, their fines are, upwards of $10,000 a year in prison. I mean, goodness, they're very, very sure of themselves of how they want to make sure that you don't do these things. You're liable to the consumer for 3 times the cost of the charge paid for the settlement service. For instance, if I were to give a discount to you, the credit union, for you to use me, and that money gets passed on to the lender, to the borrower, they don't like that. I'm not supposed to give you a credit or give you a discount for you to be able to pull people in. It's all just a huge, I don't know what words you want to use. They want to make sure that nobody is nobody is out there giving things away for free to get business, or not for free, but at a cheaper price so that they can get more business in and then paying that money back to the credit union. Consumers can bring a private action in court. Courts may award attorney's fees and so on. Prior to the CFPB, RESPA was enforced by HUD, and there just wasn't a whole lot of fines that were based on that. But with the rewrite of CFPB, now they have these teeth that they can really start to give us a lot of grief on. So Dodd-Frank, that's where, a lot of those civil penalties came in with the CFPB. $5,000 each day, $25,000 each day for reckless and didn't know it. And then $1 million a day, it's violated federal consumer financial laws. So these are huge fines, and $5,000 a day because you sent out something incorrectly. And that's where Common Bond Title comes in. We do a lot of your RESPA for you. We make sure that you're in compliance with the Consumer Financial Protection Act. We make sure you're in compliance with the Privacy Acts when we're doing your closings for you. That's one of the things that we are, an expert at when we help you process your loans, do your paperwork, do your closings, and get everything back to you. We get it back to you in a completely Consumer Financial Protection Bureau compliant package. And in doing that we make sure that we hope that we are making sure that there are no, liabilities out there for either of us down the road. Does anybody have any questions on, on any of that? I'm looking at my little chat box, y'all. Okay. So let me go back up to the top. So y'all just bear with for a second. I'm gonna get back to the top. So mortgage assumptions. Mortgage assumptions are a little bit different in the fact of how you handle those. At its most basic level, a mortgage assumption is when a buyer takes over a seller's existing mortgage obligation. Like with FHA loans and some of the HUD loans, they're assumable. Most credit unions loans aren't assumable, but you can, if you're doing them in-house, but if you're selling on the secondary market and you're doing an FHA or a HUD or a VA, they're assumable. So if an assumable loan is out there, that's great, because in a rising rate environment, somebody could buy your lower rate if you wanted to let them do that. It's a piece that some people will allow to happen. I think it's a really great piece for assumption when it's done right. When it's through the credit union, this kind of assumption involves a novation where the seller original borrower is completely released from their obligation. Now on VA loans, that's not true. There are some private assumptions, but those happen without the lender's approval. They're much riskier. Oh, there comes Mr. Ed. We're going to let him do his part. Hey, Ed.
Hey, everybody. Sorry about me misunderstanding the timing. I determined that if you're on the telephone, you can hear everything. You just can't say anything. So sorry, you all couldn't hear me saying, I'm here, I'm here.
I'm sorry, Ed.
Not a problem at all. Well, thanks again. I apologize, everybody, for me misunderstanding the time zones. You think I could have figured that out by now, but didn't happen this time. So, and I was able to listen kind of where Lynn is concerning mortgage assumptions. So thanks for taking care of that. I did sign it on my phone because I was desperate to get in. So I apologize if the video isn't great. Let me make sure the video is working. Yeah, it's on. Well, as Lynn said, look, we love mortgages that are assumable, and I think many credit unions do. But I think a vast majority of them say they're not assumable, expressly. And until the last year, I don't know if any of us had even thought about assuming a loan for 20 years or 25 years, right? Because we just haven't had a massive increase in rates. But with the massive increase in rates, we've seen many, many credit unions start asking, and really their members saying, I can't sell my home for what I want to get out of it because I have a 3.8% rate, and the person who's buying is going to have a 6.8% rate. And so all of this is a credit union decision, right? You're never required to accept an assumption. However, if you do decide to accept an assumption, we need to make sure we've taken care of ourselves. And so, let me go to the next slide. If we're doing VA, FHA, USDA loans, we have to know that most of them have some type of assumability authority or action is present. If you're doing in-house loans, if you're using a loan liner form, or you're doing a home equity loan, or you're doing a land loan, most of those will say in the mortgage or deed of trust or security deed that they're not assumable. Now, does that prevent us from assuming it? No, it just allows us to then decide whether we're going to allow it to be assumable or not. And so if the credit union says, we keep having members asking, we've got to decide to assume one, we're going to allow assumption, we get to decide what that means. We get to set standard policies and procedures. And so it's a great opportunity for the credit union to decide what we're willing to do. We have a client who said, yes, I'll allow any loan be assumed as long as they pay me $5,000 mortgage assumption fee. Well, hey, that's a bunch of fees all of a sudden going into your account, right? And so it could be a profit generation thing. And that also can help you recover some of the money you're not going to get from the refinancing of a loan from 3.8% to 6.8%, right? So it allows you then to try to recover some of those losses that you otherwise have. I know Lynn talked about kickbacks and having to pay things. RESPA, of course, applies to everything. And so RESPA will still apply to the assumption process. And so we need to make sure that we're not paying a kickback, that we're providing sufficient information. Obviously the loan has already been closed, right? And so we're not creating a new loan. This is not a refinance, but we still need to make sure that the individual, the member who's going to assume the loan and start paying it, understand what's happening. And so that's why it's important to understand that RESPA, truthful lending, those type of laws are still applicable in an assumption. Okay, moving next. Of course, in a vast majority of time, the member who's selling their home and trying to have you accept the assumption of that mortgage has made a bunch more money on it, right? And so if you're in the Tampa area, you've tripled your money in the last 5 years. If you're in the Atlanta area, you've doubled your money in the last 10 years, wherever you may be. And so often the buyer's having to make up that difference. And that's where it becomes a little more complicated. And so let's say you allow an assumption of your first lien loan. Is the credit union then going to offer a HELOC to the person who's assuming the loan so they can pay for the rest of the value of the home because it has increased in value in the last 5 years since your mortgage was underwritten? And of course, if you're going to do that, that's a whole new loan, and we have to comply with all the standards. What if you're doing a second loan fixed? They want to assume the loan. Well, you have to realize, hey, we've got to provide our loan estimate and closing disclosures. And so whenever we're talking about assumption, it's not just often this person's going to take over payments. It's often more complicated than that. The other thing is the credit union is never required to allow or never required to have its existing borrower be released. Now, of course, most borrowers don't want to still be liable for a home they no longer own that they've sold and had the loan assumed to the new buyer. But technically, you're never required to release a specific member, the original borrower, from that loan. The next slide talks about disclosures. And so one of the things that we have to realize is that most of those disclosures from a RESPA perspective do have to be received by the new borrower or the assumed party. And so, not always, but it's often better to provide too much to the party who's assuming the loan than too little. We don't want the new borrower, that's the person who assumed it, to say, oh, I didn't understand I had to pay for escrow, for example, right? We want to make sure they're clear. Hey, you have to pay for escrow. We might want to inform them that, payments must be received through this certain party. There's going to be all kinds of things that you tell someone when they do a loan closing that this person who's assuming the loan has to go through. And so it's really important that we're giving some of that information as soon as we can to that individual who's trying to assume that loan. The next slide is about underwriting. And so, as I said, you get to decide, you as the credit union get to decide who you're going to allow assume and why. And so, are you going to go through a standard application process? That's acceptable, right? We can go through the full application process. And I use application for an assumption because they're not applying for a brand new loan, let's say. But we can go through the full underwriting process to make sure that we really want this person to be able to assume this loan. Now, I note that if it's an FHA, VA, HUD loan, there are some limitations concerning what we're required to do or what we can do as part of the assumption process. So, if we're talking about assuming one of those government loans, we can talk about that offline. But if it's any of these other loans, it's just completely based upon what the credit union feels comfortable with. You just jump in there and do what you need to do, right? And so part of that can be full underwriting. It could be the credit union deciding we need to do an AVM on the value of the property. It could be the credit union requiring something else, especially, of course, if you're going to do a second loan or a HELOC loan, a second fix. Of course, you might require a full appraisal, but we can make through that process. What is the credit union comfortable with? The great thing about an assumption is it really is, it allows the credit union a lot of flexibility to decide what it's comfortable doing and what it's not comfortable doing, right? And so because of that, we have a lot of flexibility there. Sometimes we get questions about a successor and interest. So this is a scenario where Grandchild is living in grandmother's home and has for the last 10 years, and grandmother dies, and grandchild is the successor in interest, which means that they have the ability to receive information concerning that property. That means they have the ability to continue to make payments. They can come to you and ask for, a statement to show their last payment. We can't really kick them out of the property in most cases. What if that person says, hey, I want to assume this loan? The credit union is not required to say yes. We might want to, because we want to know the person who's making payments. We might want to know who's in the property, but we're not required to say yes. If it is a successor in interest, which means somebody that can have all that information on the existing status of this loan, on the escrow, et cetera, it might make assumption a little bit easier because they already know how much the loan is there. The other thing I want to talk about assumption is make sure that we're receiving the member's authority to provide any information concerning this loan before we give it to the buyer, right? Just because the buyer applies for an assumption, hey, I'm buying this property, I want to assume the loan, that doesn't mean that we automatically can provide that buyer anything and everything concerning the existing loan, right? The existing loan is confidential information for our member. And so we need to make sure we're receiving from our member permission to give them information about the loan balance and the rate and escrow and everything else. And then the other thing to remember is if we are escrowing, that's often going to require a short year statement because unless it's included in the contract, we're going to have a new person paying for insurance. Their insurance is probably going to change. Their taxes might change. In the state of Florida, they're going to lose their grandfather, very likely. And so they're going to have a massive increase in taxes, very likely, at the next tax year. And so often credit unions are going to do a short year statement for escrow at the time of an assumption. Finally, slide 9. This has surprised me when I looked it up when we started talking about this again after probably been 15, 20 years. But a non-member can actually assume a loan. And so if we're not providing that buyer, that person who's buying the property, which we have a loan for, if we're not providing them an extension of credit, if we're not paying for that, if we're not giving them a HELOC or a second fixed, and we're simply allowing them to take on the existing debt that our member already owes, that individual actually doesn't have to qualify for membership. And so they could assume it, the loan even not becoming a member. It's almost a non-member financing. Of course, we need to know who they are, right? We're accepting funds from them. We're sending them information. So we're required to provide them OFAC, right? We're going to run OFAC on them. But we're not required to make them a member. So if they're not actually eligible for membership, if you have a limited field of membership, or they're buying a condo on the beach in Pensacola, and they live in Ohio and they're not eligible for your membership, well, guess what? You can still allow them to do an assumption because a non-member can assume a loan. So that's a bit about assumption. Any questions? Anyone doing assumptions and having any problems so far?
There's nothing
Hearing
to
none?
add at this point.
Oh, great. Well, that means Lynn and I did a great combo job on assumptions. So thank you, Lynn, for starting us off. The next question, the next section is about real estate loans and modifications. And so again, because of we're not in a recession so far that we're aware of, right? But we are seeing increases in defaults, right? And so many of us realize credit card defaults have increased. Auto lending, especially used auto lending, defaults have increased. And we're starting to see a little bit on the real estate side. I was with the credit union in Tampa last week, and we had an hour conversation where we went through and reworked their loan modification workout policy because they realized, hey, we might not be in a recession yet, but a recession is coming, right? It's always going to happen, right? We're never going to not have a recession. So they wanted to work through their loan modification workouts ahead of time so they could decide what they're going to offer their members. And I think that's a great idea. And so what is a loan modification? It's not a refinance. And I say that because as your lawyer, for some of you at least, when we do a refinance, we now have to provide all the truth in lending disclosures, right? So we have, it's a pain in the neck. And if we're doing a refinance, something called the refinance or defined as refinance, why are we doing it via modification? Let's just do a brand new loan, because we have to do all the work anyways. And so if we're going to do something called the modification, where we're not going to provide them all brand new disclosures, where we're not going to go through the whole process of a brand new loan, it's a great opportunity for us to do a modification. And a modification, again, isn't a refinance. It means that we're doing limited changes. Now, what can it be? It can be a loss mitigation strategy. So somebody's delinquent and we want to make sure we don't foreclose. Can we put a balloon at the end? Yes, that can be a modification. We can decrease your payment, just allow there to be a balloon at the end. Can we offer a rate decrease? Absolutely. Can we simply just offer a 12-month payment decrease? Absolutely. So you really have a tremendous amount of opportunity to do a loan modification. During the Great Recession, the NCUA said, hey, you all should do anything you can to help protect our borrowers. Now, a couple years later, we saw lots of clients get written up for offering loan modifications. Not because they offer the modification, but because the NCUA examiner said, well, your board hadn't sufficiently approved what you did. And so if you're offering loan modification workouts, things like that, or you're preparing for the next recession to do so, make sure your board of directors have approved what you're offering.
Ed,
Now,
I have a
those of us,
question for you.
yeah,
Should you do your loan modification as a note modification or as a mortgage modification and record the modification?
great question. And so it depends on what you're offering. And so if all you're doing is reducing their rate, then there's no reason to record it. There's no reason to touch the mortgage, right? The member's rate is purely in the note. You're not required to record the note. Why have to deal with recording anything? But if you're doing something like moving the modification or a maturity date out, if you're doing something like adding an additional principal, if you're taking other actions like that, then it's very possible you'll want to record the modification. In Florida and certainly in Orange Beach, Alabama, and certain other places in Georgia, I'm sure on the coast of Georgia, insurance is skyrocketing, right? And so we have clients who are coming to us saying, I've got a member who can make their loan payment, but their escrow is doubling this year, right? And so what can we do? Well, that's a great opportunity for a loan modification if the credit union deems it to be in its best interest of itself and the member. We've had some members who said, I can't pay my insurance anymore. What can I do? Well, that person needs to sell their house, right? There's only so many things we can do because we require insurance. I have a friend who lives in South Florida, and his insurance guy told him, oh, just don't pay for insurance. Have your mortgage company force place insurance. That way you can afford the payment. Well, as a lawyer, that seems like really bad advice since our force place insurance isn't protecting anything besides our loan. But that is true. That is an option. And so what we're seeing so many people struggle with tax increases, insurance increases. Loan modifications might have to be part of our option to keep that person in their property. But again, can we enter in a loan modification that we know the member can't pay? Of course not. And you will see an examiner every once in a while be a backseat driver saying, you entered into this loan modification and had to foreclose a year later. Didn't you know you were going to have to foreclose? Well, of course not, because we wouldn't have waited for the year. But that's why it's important to consider what we're offering. After the Great Recession, several studies were performed by many universities about what works. And I'll let you know, many of the studies said a modification that's between 6 and 12 months can work. That very few modifications of 1 month actually allowed the member to get caught up, right? And so I'm not suggesting I'm providing operational advice, but please be aware that that is something that many of the studies have determined, that it actually needs to be a longer term modification to make it work. On our next slide, we're talking about common ways modifications, and here's a bunch of ideas that we see. Again, make sure your policy actually says what your modification options are. And there is an NCUA opinion that says that the loan modification or workout policy should expressly say what we're offering. And so here's some things that you can think about. How many of our real estate loans get paid in full on maturity? How many of our loans make maturity? Very, very few. So when you're thinking about a modification that has a balloon note at the end, realize that the chance of that occurring is pretty low. The chance of them refinancing or selling the home is much higher. And so, be more comfortable there. Principal forgiveness, is that acceptable? Absolutely. I don't have many clients who are so generous, but certainly that is something that can be offered.
Shared appreciation, I've never seen that one done.
Yeah, and so you can actually say, we're going to work out something. And so when you sell your home or when you transfer your home, you now owe us an extra $20,000 or $40,000 or a percentage of the sales price. Or, you can get really creative if necessary. And the credit union, of course, believes that it's in their best interest. I always say that, I'm not the chief lending officer. I don't get to decide that. I'm happy to help you benefit everyone, but I don't get to make that decision. So common requirements that we're seeing, again, make sure we have policies and procedures in place. Before you start offering modifications, have a form. And so have an extension form, right? So if all you're going to offer is 3 months, no payments, like you did in COVID, have that form ready, right? If you realize that hurricane season's upon us and they're talking about a really bad hurricane season, if a hurricane hits Savannah, what are we going to offer members? And it might be a modification, right? And so if we have a member who's coming to us on a default, what are we going to offer? Let's have these forms. Let's have our policies and procedures in place before we're asked, so that we're able to provide assistance. The NCUA has said that federal credit unions, and again, this is advice just for federal credit unions, not state chartered credit unions, often should include a trial period. So if you're going to offer someone a 5-year modification, include a 3-month trial period to make sure they can make those first 3 payments before it's effective. That can be a protection for the credit union. How about underwriting on the next slide on slide 15? The NCUA has said that when we're offering a loan modification, that we have to determine what underwriting is approved. Many of our credit unions offer modifications from the collections department or the management department. It doesn't have to be a lender. And that's okay. If you're not offering more funds, it's okay for your collections department, your recovery department, someone who's not normally a lender, to approve a loan modification. Now, if you're offering them an extra $50,000, then it's our opinion that you have to make sure that person has underwriting authority. But otherwise, define what we're going to do. If it's simply a rate discount, are we going to require an AVM, a valuation of the property? Probably not. But if we're going to push out the maturity of the loan for 15 years, well, maybe we do want to make sure the property is still standing, hasn't been hit by a tornado or something else. How about title? Are we worried about how many liens are behind us, right? We're offering a modification. We're doing something where we're really helping this member out. And we have no idea if there's a notice of commencement, 3 construction liens, they've got 4 second mortgages. And if you're in Florida, they've put solar panels on top of their house through the green program. And now they've got a lien that's the same level of insurance. Taxes on their property. And so, think about what position we're in. Think about getting a title, either opinion or at least search, to have a better idea of what we're doing there.
Especially new money, right?
Oh yeah, for new money for sure. But even if you're not putting new money, right? If you're pushing out 15 years, you need to think about what's around there. Florida's laws are very protective about doing modifications. I'll just say this: you're often protected. Alabama and Georgia, you have some protections. You've got lots of judges who have said, well, the second lien holder, the third lien holder really wasn't injured by offering the member a modification. So we're not going to let them jump you. In Florida, you have a lot of protection. But so, still better to have information, right? Better to make a decision based upon information you have. Going on underwriting on slide 16. Again, these should all be things that I would hope we'd have in our policies and procedures. It's always okay for an individual to decide, well, not individual decide, for the policy to provide certain authority to anyone, again, even a collector, even a lender, even the CEO, but make sure that we have a policies and procedure that sets it. Slide 17, why are we saying no? Again, you're never required to accept a modification. Your modification workout policy is going to say that it's a business decision for that underwriter, right? You're never required to do so. But please be aware that, you might decide there's some times that's not right. And so if you know the property burnt down, is it a right time? If you know the person who has the loan is no longer living there, it's now their grandkid, or now it's a rental property. We're not required to do that. We're not required to provide them a modification. And so, decide what are some of the things that you're worried about. The other thing is when somebody offers a modification, when somebody needs a modification, and let's say they really want to decrease their payment amount and they want to increase the maturity limit, nothing prevents you as a credit union from saying that's fine, but your rate's going to increase, right? So because we're giving you a loan on terms we would offer today, not loan terms we'd offer 10 years ago when rates were decreased. And so you have a bunch of flexibility to decide when you're going to approve, when you're going to reject, and what terms you're willing to offer. Some clients charge a fee. They'll charge a $500 fee for a modification. So again, if you're giving somebody a discount or a rate discount or something else, you can charge a fee to help recover some of the fees you're losing or interest income you're losing as part of that modification. Keeping going down to 18, those of our larger credit unions who have a ton of real estate loans, you have some additional requirements. A vast majority of credit unions are small servicers, and so you do not have to comply with the next two slides. But just in case there's somebody down here and it's not a bad best practice, both on slide 18 and 19, you'll see some things we're required to do, including continuation of contact. So getting things like 45 days notice before foreclosure sale, making sure they're speaking to the same person constantly, things like that. On slide 19, you'll see worrying about, making sure that if we're having an outstanding modification requested or workout requested, that we have to stop the foreclosure until we provide them an option if we're about to hit foreclosure sale. So if you're about to foreclose, yeah.
From Pamela, when you can say a change in collateral, is that saying structure of the home?
Yeah, so you can have a modification where we're taking on additional homes or property. We'll often see somebody buys their next door neighbor's property. So we add that on. It could be that you want to sell, somebody's downsizing and they want to sell their 5-bedroom home and move into a 2-bedroom home, and they want to keep their same rate. And so does credit union allow them to do a modification to change the collateral? Again, you have to worry about title, but yes, absolutely, you could change the physical collateral or expand the physical collateral. I think we've got another 18 minutes. Let somebody know if we're running out of time. If not, we'll move on to escrow. Sounds like we're good.
Good, go on.
Okay, great. So escrow, again, we're talking about things that might change while you already have that loan on the books. And I mentioned this in the workout part of this discussion because we are seeing such large increases in homeowners insurance, and it's really impacting the way our borrowers can keep going. RESPA lays out specific requirements for an escrow account. If you have an escrow account, you are required to do specific things. And those are provide them initial notice, provide them annual notice, and give them information about why, hey, your insurance increased double. That's why your escrow is going up, right? Things like that. Going on to our next slide, on slide 22. Here are all the things the escrow statement must include. Now, many of us use the exact same form. So if you Google escrow statement image, you're going to see like the same exact form that everyone's used since the 80s. There's no required form. So as long as you provide all this information, you can provide it anyway. We have some statement vendors who provide escrow statements. We have some statement vendors that don't. Some of y'all use, is it Dark Magic or ICE or one of these other form providers who will have escrow statements included in those forms. They're great, but you're not required to give them anything besides the information on slide 22. So I just say, there's lots of ways to be compliant with escrow. On slide 23, payments to the county. So if the credit union, if the member receives a discount for paying a lump sum amount for taxes to the county, we're required to do so. If they don't, we could pay quarterly, monthly, whatever else. Most of our clients want to decrease the number of checks they're sending from their escrow account, not increase them, right? And so most are going to pay all at once. But please know, if you actually receive a discount, you're required to provide, make a payment from escrow in a way to provide that discount. How about insurance? Excuse me. On insurance on page 24. If the borrower is unless the borrower is 30 days or more delinquent, we have to pay for insurance. So what does that mean? Our borrower hasn't paid us for our loan, but it's been for less than 30 days and the insurance from our escrow amount is due. We are required to actually give the member some money to help make sure that insurance amount gets paid. That's even if we paid taxes last month, we're paying insurance this month, then we're going to collect escrow for the next 10 months. So we're really negative in our escrow account. The member's in default, they haven't paid us. We still have to pay for insurance if they're less than 30 days delinquent. That's certainly frustrating, but that's the way it goes. Unless we believe the member has stopped paying for insurance, canceled or not renewed that insurance policy, we have to pay for insurance. So again, this is all about making sure that our member, our borrower, is as protected as humanly possible by the credit union's escrow payments. It's not beneficial to us, it's beneficial to the member.
That's flood
escrow analysis.
also, right?
Sorry?
That's flood insurance also.
Oh yeah, and when I'm talking about insurance, I'm talking about everything: hazard insurance, flood insurance, wind. So if we're in a wind area, wind insurance. Hey, earthquake insurance. I don't think any of us require earthquake insurance, but maybe they should in New Jersey now. So whatever type of insurance we require, we need to make sure we collect and pay through our escrow insurance. On slide 25, escrow analysis. So again, moving forward, I hope everyone on the call is using an escrow, because if not, I apologize for talking about something you don't do, but I'm almost done. Escrow analysis is our yearly action. So at least once a year, we're required to perform an escrow analysis. And that just tells the member, hey, this is what we paid out. This is what we collected. This is what we expect in the following year. So you can do a short year statement. So if you've been doing escrow every January and you want to do it in March, you still have to do it every 12 months. So you'd have to do it in January, then do it again in March, and then the following March, you could do escrow analysis again. Again, this is just information. You're just informing the member, this is why I'm taking so much money. It's because I'm paying taxes and insurance. I'm paying HOA fees. There's a special assessment, whatever it is, we're informing the member that's why we're paying so much. Now, what happens when there's a shortage? When the member's been paying the same amount every month, and we found out that their insurance doubled. Well, the credit union actually has a lot of flexibility. If we don't have enough money, we can do nothing. We could just have the member owe us for that, whatever that back payment amount in taxes forever. I don't know any client that does that, but we could. We can require equal repayment over the next 12 months. So last year, you owed us $2,000 in insurance. We could split that $2,000 over the next 12 months. Finally, we could say, you owe us this amount immediately, and your failure to do so is an event of default. So we gave you the $2,000 of extra insurance money. You owe us it, pay us it now, right? Now that's if it's more than a month's payment amount. If it's a less than a month's payment amount, we can't place the loan default. We can do nothing, require repayment within 30 days, not immediately, or over a 12-month period. So there'll be lots of people getting shortage statements, I think, this year and next year because of insurance. And so these are some options you have. Finally, what if we have a surplus? In the past, many of us tried to hold on to that surplus. I understand that need, but if it's $50 or more, we have to give it back to the member. Of course, you can call the member and say, hey, you have a surplus. Do you want that check? And if they say no, put it back to escrow. My insurance just doubled. Then we can do that. But to keep the money over $50, we have to have that member's approval. I didn't realize I had two more slides or a couple more slides. What if the loan's delinquent? We're never required to take any action if the loan is delinquent. So that means we're not required to disperse if the borrower is 30 days or more. So delinquent one day, we have to keep doing everything. At day 31, we no longer have to worry about escrow. We don't have to do an escrow analysis. We don't have to disperse insurance funds or tax funds. Many clients still do so because often when you do an escrow analysis, the member is actually going to owe us more money. And so you want to make sure the member borrower realizes, yeah, I'm delinquent on my loan for principal and interest. I'm also delinquent on my escrow. And so make sure that we're doing that as we can. Let's see, at payoff, we want to make sure we return the funds within 20 business days. We generally recommend against you including it in the payoff balance quote. This can create all kinds of problems where somebody thinks they've got escrow or they don't. They think they're getting money or they don't. We recommend that you do this very uniformly. So whatever we do, you do it uniformly. We generally recommend against including the escrow amount in the payoff balance quote. Sometimes you'll see the escrow gets transferred. Let's see, escrow. Higher price loans are required to escrow. I'm going to skip through this because we're out of time. Escrow, make sure we're listing the escrow on the loan estimate and closing disclosure. Of course, easier to just have Common Bond do it. But if you don't, then make sure you're including escrow information on the loan estimate and closing disclosure. And finally, there are some very specific fees and penalties for escrow. So just be aware of that. That $50 per loan can be charged. And so, that could add up, but they're not going to be able to sue us. So it's nice that there's no private cause of action. Okay, that was a quick, and I apologize for not understanding time zones, but thank you so much for letting me join in. Do we have any questions?
I've got one. So why would you as the lender quit paying for homeowners insurance if you got the mortgage on it? You don't want it to burn down?
Well, because hopefully when you've received notice they're no longer paying, you add CPI. Gotcha. And you can deal with the CPI people, that you've got a contract directly with them. You're not having to worry about Allstate through the party who you just foreclosed on and having to show them that you now own the property and the check should be written to you. So generally CPI companies are just easier.
Thank you for that education for me.
Yeah. Anybody
got any questions? We so appreciate your time today and you listening to us. Thank you.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Much, everybody.
We really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Hope everybody else did too, and hope you enjoyed it.
The recording for this will be out there on the intranet for you guys, and I'll be sending you a copy of the presentation. If anybody has any questions, please call Ed or myself.